The millionaire, tired of his empty world of luxury, would always watch his gardener. Until one day, he finally decided to approach her. From the massive windows of his estate, Miles studied the property grounds. The view stretched out for acres, pristine lawns, meticulously arranged flower beds, and a vast garden at the edge. Yet, it felt lifeless to him. The silence gnawed at him, echoing in the hallways and bouncing off the marble floors. He'd been standing there for a while, hands in his pockets, staring at the garden. It was the only spot he hadn't personally designed or paid much attention to until recently. Someone else took care of it. Someone he'd never bothered to meet. A knock sounded on the door. Miles, his assistant, stepped in. "They're ready for you in the boardroom." Miles sighed, glancing back at the garden one last time. "Right, let's go." Hours later, after the meeting and the endless conversations about profits, strategies, and expansions, Miles excused himself. He returned to his office, shut the door, and leaned back in his chair, eyes closing. He couldn't shake the image of the garden. A simple part of his estate, nothing extraordinary, but somehow it had captured his attention. And then he saw her. The gardener, the woman who'd been working outside, absorbed in her task. From his office, he could just make out her outline through the window. She moved with precision, gently tending to the plants, her head down, focused. The way she worked, it was as if she was in a world of her own, untouched by the estate's cold grandeur. For the first time in years, he felt something stir, curiosity. The next morning, Miles found himself back at the window, watching her again. She was dressed in plain clothes, a faded shirt and pants, her hair tied back. She didn't seem to notice him or anything around her, just the flowers and the earth beneath her hands. "Good morning, sir." His assistant's voice pulled him out of his thoughts. Morning." Miles cleared his throat. "Who's that?" "The woman in the garden." "Her name is Clara, sir. She's been working here for over a year. A reliable worker, very diligent." "Right, reliable." He said the word slowly, almost to himself. "Does she ever talk to anyone? Does she seem happy?" The assistant raised an eyebrow. "Happy? I'm not sure. She's quiet, just does her job and leaves. Never asked for anything extra." Miles nodded, distracted. "Arrange a meeting with her. I'd like to talk to her." The assistant hesitated. "Are you sure? She's just—" "Yes, I want to meet her." That afternoon, Miles strolled through the garden, pretending to inspect the place. Clara was bent over a row of roses, her hands deep in the soil. She didn't look up, too focused on her work to notice him. He cleared his throat. "Excuse me." She glanced up, her expression neutral, and stood, wiping her hands on her pants. "Yes, sir. I'm Miles. I mean, of course you know that," he stammered, something he hadn't done in years. "I wanted to thank you. The garden looks good." Clara nodded. "Thank you." They stood there in awkward silence. He tried to think of something else to say, but found himself at a loss. Finally, she nodded again, bending back down to her work. Miles realized she wasn't going to continue the conversation, so he walked away. The next few days, he watched her again, fascinated by her simplicity. She didn't notice him, didn't look up once. It was like he didn't exist. He felt an odd sense of relief at that. No expectations, no pretense. At a dinner party one evening, an old business partner leaned over to him, pointing towards the garden through the glass doors. "You ever think about expanding that area, Miles? Maybe put in a fountain, add some luxury. This place could use a touch-up." Miles felt a pang of irritation. "I think it's fine as it is." The partner raised an eyebrow. "Fine. Just looks like an ordinary garden." That's the point. The following morning, Miles was back at the window, watching Clara again. She was tending to the roses, her movements precise and careful. He thought about going out to talk to her again, but stopped himself. There was something comforting about just watching her work. No conversation needed. But later that day, he received news that jolted him. One of his board members had proposed plans to redesign the garden area. They wanted to clear it out, replace it with a modern patio, something to impress clients. And since it was technically under the estate's luxury development, they could push it through without much discussion. Miles shook his head. No, we're not touching it. The board member looked confused. But it's just a garden. We thought, no, he repeated, firmer this time. It stays. That's final. The member left, slightly bewildered. Miles turned back to the window, watching Clara as she moved between the flower beds, utterly unaware of the storm brewing around her simple, quiet world. He knew he'd have to fight to keep the garden as it was. The board would push back, and his family would call it foolish sentimentality. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't care. There was something about that little piece of earth, tended by someone who worked in silence and solitude, that grounded him. It made him feel human. As he watched Clara wipe sweat from her brow and lean back on her heels, examining a row of freshly planted flowers, he felt a strange sense of calm. For once, he wanted to protect something not for its value, but for what it represented, a quiet resistance against everything he'd built. The thought startled him, but he held on to it, like a lifeline in the overwhelming silence of his life. Miles sat at the head of the long dining table, the clinking of silverware and murmur of conversation filling the room. His business associates discussed the latest market trends, but his mind drifted to the garden and Clara's diligent care. Miles, one of the investors said, drawing his attention. We've been reviewing the estate's layout. There's potential to expand the main house by incorporating the garden area. A new wing could serve as a conference center or guest suites. Miles's grip tightened on his fork. You want to demolish the garden? Not demolish, repurpose, the investor replied. It's underutilized space. Think of the revenue potential. The room buzzed with agreement, but Miles's thoughts were elsewhere. The idea of tearing down the garden, Clara's sanctuary, unsettled him. I'll consider it, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. That evening, Miles wandered into the garden, the cool air a welcome contrast to the stifling dining room. He found Clara kneeling by a bed of tulips, her hands gently patting the soil around them. Good evening, he said. Clara looked up, a hint of surprise in her eyes. Evening, sir? He hesitated, then crouched beside her. These tulips are beautiful. You've done excellent work here. Thank you, she replied, her gaze returning to the flowers. How long have you been tending this garden? About a year now. Do you enjoy it? She paused, then nodded. It's peaceful. I like seeing things grow. Miles watched her, noting the calmness in her demeanor. What if the garden were to change, be repurposed? Clara's hands stilled. May change how? There's talk of expanding the house into this area. She looked around, taking in the beds, the trees, the life she'd nurtured. That would be a shame. Yes, he agreed softly. The following days were a blur of meetings and proposals. The board was enthusiastic about the expansion, presenting blueprints and financial forecasts. Miles listened, but his thoughts remained anchored in the garden. It's a sound investment, one board member insisted. The new wing will pay for itself within 5 years. And the garden? Miles asked. A small sacrifice for progress, came the reply. That evening, Miles stood at his window, watching Clara as she worked. The idea of erasing her efforts, her solace, weighed heavily on him. Determined to find a solution, Miles called a meeting with the architects. "And is there a way to expand without touching the garden?" The lead architect adjusted his glasses. "We could consider building upward or utilizing other parts of the estate, but it would be more costly." "Cost isn't the issue," Miles said firmly. "I want alternatives." The team exchanged glances but nodded. "We'll draft new plans," the architect agreed. Later, Miles found Clara by the rose bushes, her fingers deftly pruning the stems. "Clara," he began, "I've decided to preserve the garden. We'll find another way to expand." She looked up, a mixture of surprise and gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, sir." He smiled. "It's the least I can do." The new plans were met with resistance. Board members argued about increased costs and delayed timelines. Miles stood his ground. "The garden stays," he stated. "Find another way." Grudgingly, they complied. One afternoon, as Miles walked through the garden, he noticed Clara struggling with a heavy bag of soil. "Let me help you with that," he offered, taking the bag from her. She looked surprised but nodded. "Thank you." As they worked side by side, a comfortable silence settled between them. "You really care about this place," he observed. "I do," she replied. "It's more than just a job." He nodded, understanding more than he let on. That evening, Miles sat in his study, reflecting on the day's events. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond business and wealth. The garden, and Clara's dedication to it, had awakened something in him. He resolved to spend more time there, to learn from her, and perhaps, to find the fulfillment that had long eluded him. Miles found himself in the garden early the next morning, surprised at his own eagerness to be there. Clara was already at work, carefully tending to a row of freshly planted lilies. She looked up as he approached, a faint question in her eyes. "Morning, Clara," he greeted, trying to sound casual. She gave a polite nod. "Good morning, sir." He cleared his throat, suddenly unsure of what to say. "I thought I might see if you need any help. I've never actually gardened before, but I'm willing to try." Clara raised an eyebrow, but a hint of a smile softened her expression. "Well, there's always weeding. Not the most glamorous task, but it's useful." "Weeding," he nodded. "I can handle that." She pointed to a patch of soil. "Over there. Just pull them out by the roots. If you leave any of the root, they'll grow back." He knelt beside her, clumsily pulling at the weeds, feeling a bit foolish under her watchful eye. After a few minutes, he could feel her amusement. "You're pulling out the marigolds too," she pointed out. He stopped, looking down in horror. I thought they were weeds." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "No, they're supposed to be here. Try these." She handed him a few weeds as examples. For the next hour, they worked side by side, Miles occasionally glancing at her, trying to read her expression. She worked methodically, her hands moving with a practiced grace. It was calming, being out here in the fresh air, his hands in the soil. "You really care about this place," he said, finally breaking the silence. She nodded, her gaze never leaving her work. "It's satisfying, making something beautiful, watching it grow. Must be a change from being around people like me," he said with a small, self-deprecating smile. Clara paused, looking at him directly for the first time. "I don't mind. People come and go, but the garden stays. It doesn't judge, and it doesn't change." After that morning, Miles made it a habit to stop by the garden daily. Sometimes he'd just watch her work. Other times he'd join in, still clumsy with the tools but learning bit by bit. They talked more, though Clara was still reserved, her answers short and direct. One afternoon, Miles found himself frustrated with the distance between them. He felt like he was making no progress, like he was still just the boss, to her. "Can I ask you something?" he ventured, breaking their usual silence. Clara glanced at him, her expression cautious. "Sure. Would you like any help? Not just in the garden, I mean, financially." He hesitated, realizing he didn't know much about her life outside the garden. "I could make things easier for you." She frowned, her hands pausing mid-task. "Why would you offer that?" "I just thought, well, you work hard. Maybe there's something you need, and I could—" Clara shook her head, a trace of annoyance in her expression. "I'm not here for charity. I like this job. I don't need anything more than that." Miles felt a flush of embarrassment. "I didn't mean to offend you." She softened, letting out a sigh. "I know, but sometimes money isn't the answer." He nodded, feeling strangely humbled. She didn't want anything from him, not his wealth, not his influence. It was both refreshing and unsettling. That evening, there was a party in his home, a gathering of influential business people and friends. Miles mingled with the crowd, but his mind kept drifting to the garden. Halfway through the evening, he found himself stepping outside for some air. From the edge of the garden, he could see Clara working under the glow of the estate's outdoor lights. She moved with her usual grace, oblivious to the gathering inside. A group of guests nearby watched her with faint disdain, their whispers reaching his ears. "Isn't it strange? He spends so much time with the gardener. Imagine being interested in someone so plain." Miles felt a surge of irritation. He knew how these people thought, the shallow judgments that ruled their world. But hearing it out loud made him realize how disconnected he'd become from his own circle. He stepped forward, catching Clara's eye. She looked startled, but gave him a brief nod before turning back to her work. He wished he could explain, tell her that he wasn't like them, but he knew she wouldn't believe him. Not yet. The next day, he found her in the garden again, pulling weeds with her usual focused expression. "Sorry about last night," he said as he approached. She glanced at him, her face unreadable. "For what?" "The way those people looked at you. The things they might have said." She shrugged. "I'm used to it. People with money think they're above others. I stopped caring about that a long time ago." Miles felt a pang of guilt. I don't see you that way." Clara paused, studying him with a skeptical look. "Then why are you here? Why spend your time with someone like me?" "Because I like it here," he replied, surprised by his own honesty. "This place feels real. And so do you." Her eyes softened slightly, but she didn't respond. She simply nodded, turning back to her work. In the following days, Clara's attitude toward him seemed to shift. She spoke to him more openly, answering his questions with less reservation. They fell into a quiet routine. She'd work, he'd help when he could, and they'd talk. Nothing profound, just simple conversations about the plants, the weather, the rhythm of the garden. One afternoon, he asked her about her life outside the estate. She shrugged, giving him a rare glimpse into her guarded world. "It's just me and my son," she said simply. "I work here, go home and take care of him." He was taken aback. "You have a son. I didn't know." "Why would you?" she replied with a slight smile. "He's 8. He doesn't know what I do, just that I come home with dirt on my hands." Miles chuckled, picturing her arriving home, her son greeting her with laughter. "Must be nice, having someone waiting for you." She looked at him, a hint of pity in her eyes. "You don't have that." He shook his head, suddenly feeling the weight of his solitude. "No, not for a long time." That evening, Miles found himself reflecting on her words. For all his wealth, he had no one waiting for him, no family to come home to. He spent his days surrounded by people but felt more alone than ever. And yet, here was Clara, with her quiet strength, building a life of meaning, despite the challenges. In that moment, he realized why he was drawn to her. She represented everything he'd lost touch with: simplicity, purpose, and a sense of belonging. And for the first time in years, he found himself wondering if he could ever have that again. The next morning, Miles arrived in the garden to find Clara already busy trimming a row of lavender. She looked up as he approached, and for the first time, he noticed a faint warmth in her expression. "Good morning, Clara," he said, feeling more at ease. "Morning, sir." "You know, you can call me Miles," he offered, hoping to bridge the gap between them. Clara hesitated, her hands pausing mid-task. "I'll try to remember that," she replied, her tone carefully neutral. But he caught the brief flicker of amusement in her eyes. They worked in silence, side by side, falling into a rhythm. He found that he enjoyed the quiet moments here, without the noise of boardrooms and crowded parties. The garden had become a refuge, a place where he could just be. Later that day, Miles joined his family for lunch. His sister, Evelyn, glanced at him curiously. "You've been spending a lot of time in the garden," she remarked, an edge to her tone. Miles took a sip of water, shrugging. "I enjoy it. It's peaceful." Evelyn exchanged a look with their mother. "Is that all?" He felt the unspoken accusation, the judgment in their eyes. "Yes, that's all," he replied firmly, his voice flat. His mother sighed. "Miles, you've always had a sense of responsibility to the family, to our name. Spending time with her might send the wrong message." He clenched his jaw. "And what message is that?" "That you're lowering yourself," Evelyn answered, not meeting his gaze. Miles felt a flash of anger. "I think I'll decide for myself what's appropriate." The conversation ended there, but he felt their disapproval hanging in the air. It was a reminder of the world he belonged to, a world that viewed people like Clara as nothing more than help. That evening, he wandered back to the garden, needing the solitude more than ever. He found Clara working near the greenhouse, her back to him. She turned as he approached, a question in her eyes. "Long day?" she asked, her voice low. "Something like that," he replied, running a hand through his hair. "Family. They have opinions." She nodded, understanding without needing details. "People often have opinions about things they don't understand." He looked at her, struck by her insight. "And you're okay with that? People judging you?" She shrugged, unbothered. "Doesn't change who I am, or how I live." For a moment, he envied her. She'd built a life that wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval, a life of her own making. The next afternoon, Miles watched from his window as Clara moved through the garden. She was speaking with one of the other staff members, laughing at something he'd said. He felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't jealousy, but a longing to be part of that easy camaraderie, that genuine connection. Later, he joined her in the garden, determined to push past the invisible wall between them. "Clara," he began, unsure how to phrase it. "Would you like to have coffee with me sometime?" She looked up, startled. "Coffee?" "Yes, just coffee," he said, feeling slightly foolish. She hesitated, glancing down at the ground. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. "People talk, sir. They'll say things. I'd rather avoid the drama." Miles felt a sting of disappointment. "I don't care what people say." She met his gaze, her expression firm. But I do. I have a son to think about. My reputation matters. He fell silent, understanding her point. She had more to lose than he did. For her, this wasn't just about a coffee. It was about protecting the life she'd built. The following day, Miles found himself distracted during a business meeting. The words of his colleagues blurred into background noise, his mind elsewhere. He realized that, for all his wealth and influence, he was powerless when it came to bridging the gap between him and Clara. After the meeting, he received a message from an old friend. The friend had heard rumors about Miles's newfound interest in the garden, and in Clara. "Miles," his friend said over the phone, "I heard you've taken an interest in the gardener. Don't you think that's risky?" Miles's voice turned cold. "What's so risky about talking to someone who works for me?" The friend laughed, a mocking sound. "Come on, you know how these things go. People will talk, make assumptions. You don't want that kind of attention." "I'll decide what I want," he replied sharply, ending the call. He was beginning to see the constraints of his world, the unspoken rules that kept him trapped in a life of expectations. For the first time, he wondered if he could break free of them. That evening, he went to the garden again, determined to talk to Clara. She was there, as always, her focus on the plants rather than him. "Clara," he said quietly. She looked up, waiting. I don't want you to think I'm doing this for any reason other than respect. I admire you. I want to be a part of this place, not just own it." She studied him, her expression unreadable. "It's a nice thought, sir, but our lives are different. They always will be." The words hit him harder than he expected. She was right. There was an unbridgeable gap between them, one that no amount of good intentions could erase. As he walked back inside, he felt a deep frustration settle over him. For the first time, he saw the limits of his world, the walls that wealth and status had built around him. And he realized that, despite everything, he wasn't free, not in the ways that mattered. Inside, his family was waiting, their faces expectant. Evelyn looked at him, her voice sharp. "Are you done with this garden nonsense, Miles?" He looked back at her, feeling a quiet resolve harden within him. "No, I'm just getting started." The next morning, Miles was back in the garden, but this time, the silence felt heavy. Clara was there, focused on a row of shrubs, her expression guarded. He wanted to reach out, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he knelt beside her, mirroring her movements, his hands clumsily working the soil. They worked in silence, neither acknowledging the tension between them. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Clara, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. I don't know what I'm doing." She paused, looking at him for a long moment. "I appreciate that, sir. But I have to protect my life. My son, my reputation, they're all I have." He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. She had so much at stake, while he had the freedom to walk away at any moment. But he didn't want to walk away. Not this time. Later that day, he joined his family for lunch, the familiar tension settling over him. Evelyn glanced at him, her eyes sharp. "Miles," she began, her tone measured. "You're making a spectacle of yourself, spending so much time in the garden, with her. It's not appropriate." He felt his patience wearing thin. "What exactly is inappropriate about talking to someone who works for me?" "It's not about that," Evelyn snapped. "It's about appearances. People are talking. They think you've lost control, that you're lowering yourself." He clenched his jaw, fighting back his anger. "I don't care what people think." "Maybe you should," she replied coldly. "You have a responsibility to this family, to our name." He stood, pushing his chair back. I think I'll decide for myself what my responsibilities are." Without another word, he left, the echoes of their argument following him out the door. That evening, Miles returned to the garden, needing the solitude it offered. He found Clara near the greenhouse, her expression distant as she worked. He approached slowly, unsure of what to say. "Rough day?" she asked, not looking up. He nodded, grateful for her understanding. "Family. They don't approve of this." She glanced at him, her gaze steady. "I told you, sir. People talk." "I don't care," he replied, more forcefully than he'd intended. "I'm tired of living my life based on what other people think." Clara's expression softened slightly, but she didn't respond. Instead, she continued her work, her movements steady and calm. Miles felt a surge of frustration, wanting her to see, to understand what this meant to him. But he knew she was right. They were from different worlds, and bridging that gap would be harder than he'd imagined. The following days were filled with more tension. His family's disapproval grew louder, and rumors began to circulate among his friends and associates. Some openly questioned his judgment, while others expressed concern, their voices laced with condescension. One evening, Miles received a call from an old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. The friend's voice was casual, but the underlying message was clear. "Miles," his friend said smoothly, "I heard you've taken a personal interest in one of your employees. Don't you think that's inappropriate?" Miles felt a surge of irritation. "I think I'll decide for myself what's appropriate." The friend laughed, a mocking sound. "Come on, Miles. You know how these things look. People talk." "Then let them talk," he replied, ending the call with a sense of finality. He was tired of the endless judgment, the constant pressure to conform. For the first time, he realized that his wealth, his status, had become a cage, trapping him in a life that felt increasingly empty. The next day, he found himself in the garden again, drawn to the peace it offered. Clara was there, as always, her focus on the plants rather than him. He approached slowly, unsure of how to bridge the gap between them. "Clara," he said quietly, I want you to know that this isn't just a passing interest for me. I respect you. I admire what you've built here." She looked up, her expression unreadable. "It's a nice thought, sir, but thoughts don't change reality." He felt a pang of frustration, knowing she was right. Their lives were worlds apart, separated by barriers that couldn't be ignored. But he wasn't ready to give up, not yet. That evening, he sat in his study, staring out the window at the darkened garden. He thought about his life, about the endless parties, the meaningless conversations, the shallow relationships. For so long, he'd been content to follow the rules, to play the part expected of him. But now, he felt a restlessness he couldn't ignore. The garden had become his refuge, a place where he could escape the expectations that weighed him down. And Clara? She represented everything he'd lost touch with: simplicity, honesty, purpose. He knew he was risking everything by pursuing this, by defying his family and his world. But for the first time, he felt a sense of clarity, a determination to live life on his own terms. The next morning, he found Clara in the garden, her expression thoughtful as she worked. He approached, his heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. "Clara," he began, his voice steady, "I want you to know that this means something to me. This place, you've shown me something I'd forgotten, something real." She looked up, her gaze searching his. "And what are you planning to do with that knowledge, sir?" He hesitated, feeling the weight of her question. "I don't know yet, but I know that I don't want to go back to the way things were. Not anymore. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the unspoken understanding between them deepening. Miles felt a sense of peace, knowing that, despite the challenges ahead, he was finally on a path of his own choosing. A week passed, and the tension within Miles's family only grew. His mother had begun questioning him daily, insisting he reconsider his newfound interest in the garden and its caretaker. Evelyn avoided him altogether, her disapproval clear in her silence. One afternoon, Miles was sitting alone in his study when his oldest friend, Paul, walked in, carrying a stack of documents. Paul had been his confidant for years, the one person he trusted completely. But even Paul looked troubled as he took a seat across from him. "You know, everyone's talking, Miles," Paul started, his voice low. "Your family's worried. They think you're making a mistake with Clara." Miles leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I'm not making a mistake, Paul. For the first time, I feel like I'm actually living." Paul sighed, glancing at the papers in his hands. "I know you're tired of this life, but is this worth risking everything? The business, the estate, your family?" Miles looked away, feeling a weight settle over him. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I can't keep living for everyone else. I need to make my own choices, Paul." "Even if they're not popular?" Paul nodded, though his expression was skeptical. "Just think about it, Miles. You have a lot to lose." That evening, Miles went to the garden, needing the calm it offered. Clara was there, as always, her focus on the plants. She glanced up as he approached, her expression unreadable. "Long day?" she asked, her tone neutral. He nodded, taking a deep breath. "Clara, can I ask you something?" She looked at him, waiting. If I were to step away from all this, the business, the family obligations, would you be willing to give us a chance?" She blinked, clearly taken aback. "What are you saying?" "I mean, I could simplify things, make changes, live differently." He paused, searching her face for any sign of encouragement. "For the first time, I think I'm ready to let go of the life I've known." Clara frowned, her gaze uncertain. "That's a big step. And for what? A feeling." Miles felt a pang of frustration. "It's not just a feeling. It's more than that. I want something real, something I can actually hold on to." She sighed, glancing away. "You might think that now. But what happens when the novelty wears off? When you realize what you've given up?" "I don't care," he replied, his voice firm. "I'm willing to risk it." She met his gaze, her expression softening. "Then maybe we can start as friends. Nothing more." Miles nodded, relieved. "That's all I'm asking." In the days that followed, he began making changes. He delegated more responsibilities to his team, stepped back from the daily grind of the business. His family was shocked, questioning his every decision, but he remained resolute. Evelyn confronted him one evening, her tone sharp. "You're throwing everything away, Miles. For what? A woman who barely speaks to you." He looked at her, unflinching. "I'm doing this for me, Evelyn. For once, I'm choosing my own path." She shook her head, clearly frustrated. "You're a fool." But he didn't waver. He felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that he was finally in control of his own life. One afternoon, he invited Clara for coffee, keeping it simple. She agreed, reluctantly, and they met at a small cafe in town. The atmosphere was relaxed, far from the formality of his estate. "So," he began, breaking the silence, "how's your son?" Clara looked at him, surprised. "He's fine, growing up too fast, though." Miles smiled. Kids tend to do that. They fell into a comfortable conversation, talking about her life, her son, her hopes for the future. For the first time, he felt like he was getting to know her as a person, beyond the walls of the garden. At the end of their coffee, she looked at him thoughtfully. You know, you don't have to do all this. Changing your life, making sacrifices, it's not necessary. He shook his head. It is, Clara, because I'm finally doing something that feels right. She didn't respond, but he could tell she understood, in her quiet way. In the following days, Miles continued to simplify his life. He sold a few properties, cut back on his expenses, and focused on the things that truly mattered. His family's disapproval remained, but he didn't let it deter him. One evening, he invited Clara to dinner at the estate, keeping it casual. She hesitated, but eventually agreed, arriving in a simple dress, her hair pulled back. They ate on the patio, overlooking the garden. The conversation was light, easy, and he felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you for coming," he said, as they finished dessert. She nodded, her expression calm. "It was nice. Different." He smiled. "I hope it's the start of something better." She didn't respond, but her gaze softened, and he felt a glimmer of hope. As the weeks went by, their friendship grew. Clara became more comfortable around him, opening up bit by bit. They shared moments in the garden, quiet conversations, laughter. He felt his old life fading, replaced by something simpler, yet infinitely more fulfilling. One evening, as they were working in the garden, she looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "You know, I never thought I'd see someone like you here, doing this, getting your hands dirty." He laughed, glancing at the dirt on his hands. "It's a nice change. Less complicated." She smiled, a hint of admiration in her eyes. "Maybe you're not as different as I thought." The words filled him with a quiet satisfaction. For the first time, he felt like he belonged. A few months had passed since Miles began changing his life, and the estate had transformed along with him. He spent more time in the garden, joining Clara in her routines, and less time in the grand halls and meeting rooms. He noticed that the employees treated him differently now, some with curiosity, others with respect. He'd become a regular face in the garden, working alongside Clara, and somehow, that felt more fulfilling than any business deal he'd ever closed. One morning, Miles arrived at the garden early, and Clara was already there, inspecting a patch of soil where they'd planted a new bed of flowers. She looked up and gave him a brief nod. "These should bloom in a few weeks," she said, touching the soil with a practiced hand. "You'll like the color. It's subtle, not too flashy." "Perfect," he replied, crouching down beside her. "Simple suits this place." They worked in silence for a while, each focused on their tasks. Miles had learned the names of the plants, the different types of soil they required, and the best times to water them. It was a quiet, repetitive work, but there was a piece to it he couldn't explain. After a while, Clara straightened up and looked at him. "You're really getting the hang of this." "I never thought I'd see the day." Miles laughed. "Neither did I. Guess life has a way of surprising us." She gave him a small smile, her eyes softening. "You seem different, happier." He met her gaze, feeling a warmth spread through him. "I am." A few days later, Miles held a small gathering at the estate for friends and family. It was a modest event, nothing like the grand parties he used to throw. Clara had agreed to attend, and he spotted her in the corner of the garden, watching from a distance, clearly out of her comfort zone. He walked over to her, offering a reassuring smile. "Glad you could make it." She looked around, her expression wary. I'm not sure this is my place. Nonsense, he said, leading her toward a table. You belong here just as much as anyone else. They spent the evening talking, and for once, Miles felt like he was truly enjoying himself. The usual pretenses were gone, replaced by a genuine connection he'd longed for. His family and friends observed them from a distance, murmuring amongst themselves, but he didn't care. He was finally free of their judgment. Over the next few weeks, Miles and Clara grew even closer. They developed a routine, meeting in the garden each morning, working side by side. One day, she brought her son, a quiet boy with a curious gaze and a shy smile. Miles found himself taken with the child, his innocence and wonder a stark contrast to the jaded world Miles had always known. You have a good kid, he said to Clara as they watched her son play in the garden. She smiled, pride evident in her expression. He's my whole world. Miles felt a pang of longing. He'd never had that kind of bond, never known the joy of family in the same way. But watching Clara with her son, he found himself wishing for it. You're lucky, he said softly, almost to himself. Clara looked at him, her gaze searching. You could have that too. You're already halfway there. He met her eyes, surprised by her words. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility of a future beyond his solitary life, a life with real connections, real meaning. As summer turned into fall, Miles made more changes. He put a portion of his wealth into a trust for community projects, funding gardens and parks in underdeveloped areas. He felt lighter, freer, as if shedding the weight of his fortune allowed him to breathe again. His family was shocked, of course, but he no longer cared about their disapproval. One day, he shared his plans with Clara, who listened quietly, a faint smile on her lips. You're really doing it, she said, her tone both surprised and admiring. You're giving up so much. It's worth it, he replied simply. For the first time, I feel like I'm actually living. She looked at him, her eyes soft. You're braver than I thought. He laughed. I had a good teacher. They shared a comfortable silence, each lost in their thoughts. Miles knew he was on a new path, one he couldn't have imagined a year ago, and he was grateful for the journey. One evening, as they were finishing up in the garden, Clara turned to him, her expression thoughtful. Miles, I've been thinking, maybe we could start a small project here. Something we can work on together, like a new flower bed or a vegetable patch. Something that's ours. He felt a surge of excitement. I'd love that. They spent the next few weeks planning their project, choosing the plants, preparing the soil. It became a shared goal, a symbol of the life they were building together. They worked tirelessly, side by side, creating something beautiful and simple. For Miles, it was more than just a garden. It was a new beginning, a step toward a life he'd only dreamed of. As fall settled in, Miles and Clara's garden project began to take shape. The flower bed was coming along beautifully, with a mix of autumn blooms in deep reds, oranges, and yellows. They'd also started a small vegetable patch, planting hardy crops that would thrive through the colder months. It was satisfying, seeing their work flourish, a tangible symbol of their growing bond. One morning, Miles arrived early, a slight chill in the air, and found Clara already hard at work, tending to the vegetables. He joined her, silently appreciating the quiet companionship they'd developed. I've been meaning to ask, he said after a while. What would you think of expanding this? Maybe turn it into something bigger, like a community project. Clara looked at him, surprised. A community garden. He nodded. Yes. Something for the people around here. I have the resources to make it happen, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. Her eyes lit up at the idea. That sounds amazing, but it's a big commitment. Are you sure? I've never been more sure, he replied, smiling. This is what I want to do. They spent the rest of the day discussing ideas, planning the details. For the first time in years, Miles felt a genuine sense of purpose, a vision that went beyond personal gain. A few days later, they encountered their first setback. A cold snap hit unexpectedly, damaging some of the plants they'd worked so hard to nurture. Clara surveyed the damage, a frown on her face. It's going to take a lot to recover from this, she said, her tone worried. We'll figure it out, Miles assured her. We'll replant. Try again. She nodded, her determination evident. You're right. We can fix this. They spent the next few days working tirelessly to salvage what they could, replanting where necessary. It was hard work, but Miles found himself energized, driven by the challenge. Through it all, Clara's quiet strength kept him going. She didn't complain, didn't give up. Instead, she approached each problem with a calm resolve, and he admired her even more for it. As they worked to restore the garden, word began to spread about their project. Some people in the community expressed interest, stopping by to see what they were doing. Clara was hesitant at first, unused to the attention, but Miles encouraged her. This is exactly what we wanted, he reminded her. People getting involved, being part of something bigger. She smiled, a bit shyly. I guess I just didn't expect it to happen so fast. One afternoon, a group of local children came to the garden, their faces bright with excitement. Clara showed them around, explaining the different plants and how to care for them. Watching her interact with the kids, Miles felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what he'd been searching for, a connection, a purpose beyond himself. But not everyone was supportive. Miles's family remained vocal in their disapproval, especially when they learned about his plans for the community garden. One evening, Evelyn confronted him, her frustration evident. You're throwing everything away, Miles, she said, her voice harsh. For what? A garden. Some charity project. It's not just a garden, he replied calmly. It's a way to give back, to make a difference. She shook her head, exasperated. You've lost sight of what matters. This family, this estate, they're your responsibility. He looked at her, feeling a calm he hadn't known before. Maybe that was my responsibility, but it's not my purpose. I have to do what feels right. Evelyn stormed off, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He knew he was making the right choice, but the strain on his family ties was a heavy burden. Still, he was unwilling to sacrifice his newfound purpose for their approval. One evening, as Miles and Clara were finishing up in the garden, she turned to him, her expression thoughtful. I heard about the argument with your sister, she said quietly. Are you okay? He sighed, looking out over the garden. It's hard. They don't understand. But I'm not going back. Not to the way things were. She placed a comforting hand on his arm. You're doing something good. Something real. That's worth more than their approval. He looked at her, grateful for her support. Thank you, Clara, for everything. I don't know if I'd have made it this far without you. She smiled, a soft warmth in her gaze. I think you would have. You just needed to find your own path. As winter approached, they continued their work, adapting to the changing seasons. The vegetable patch thrived, and the community garden project gained momentum. More people became involved, each bringing their own ideas and energy. It was inspiring, seeing the transformation take place, knowing they were building something lasting. One evening, as they were cleaning up for the day, Clara looked around the garden, a hint of pride in her expression. It's really coming together, she said, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. It is, Miles agreed, feeling a similar sense of accomplishment. And it's just the beginning. They stood there in the fading light, a shared understanding passing between them. The garden had become more than just a project. It was a symbol of their journey, a testament to the changes they'd both undergone. For Miles, it was a reminder of the life he'd left behind and the one he was building now, grounded in purpose and connection. And for Clara, it was a chance to create something meaningful, a legacy she could share with her son and the community. Spring returned to the estate, bringing a new vibrancy to the garden. The flowers they had planted together were in full bloom, a riot of colors spreading across the beds. The community garden project had taken off, with locals stopping by regularly to tend to their own plots, share tips, and swap seeds. Clara had become a guiding presence for the volunteers, while Miles worked alongside her, his commitment unwavering. One morning, Clara arrived with her son, who ran excitedly toward the vegetable patch they'd planted in the fall. Miles crouched down to greet him, offering a high five. "Your mom says you're quite the gardener," Miles said, smiling at the boy. The child beamed. "She taught me everything I know." Clara watched them, her eyes warm, and for a moment, Miles felt an overwhelming sense of belonging. This was what he'd been searching for: a family, a purpose, a home that extended beyond himself. As the days passed, Miles found himself considering a future he'd never thought possible. His life had shifted entirely, and for once, he wasn't just satisfied. He was happy. One evening, after the volunteers had gone, he and Clara sat on a bench overlooking the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky with soft hues of pink and gold. "This place has changed a lot," Clara remarked, her voice thoughtful. "It has," Miles replied, "and so have we." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before he turned to her, his expression serious. "Clara, I want to thank you for everything. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you." She looked at him, surprised. "You did all this yourself, Miles. You chose to make these changes. I was just here." He shook his head, reaching for her hand. "No, you were more than that. You were the reason I realized there was more to life than what I had. You showed me what really matters." She met his gaze, her eyes softening. "I'm glad you found that. I think you've found your place." Over the following weeks, their relationship grew stronger, more natural. Clara was no longer just the gardener, and he was no longer just the owner of the estate. They had become partners, friends, and perhaps something more. The community garden flourished, drawing people from all over town, and the estate began to feel like a living part of the community, a place of connection and growth. One evening, Miles invited Clara and her son to dinner in the main house. It was a simple meal, nothing extravagant, but they laughed, shared stories, and for the first time, he felt like he was part of something real. Afterward, as they walked her to the door, Clara paused, turning to him with a hint of hesitation. This has been nice, Miles. More than nice." He nodded, his heart pounding. "For me too. I don't think I've ever been this happy." They stood there, the unspoken words hanging between them, until finally, he reached out, taking her hand. "Clara, I want this," he said quietly. "A life with you. I don't know what it will look like or how it will work, but I'm ready to try." She looked down, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I'd like that too. But slowly, step by step." He smiled, relieved. Step by step then. As spring turned to summer, their relationship blossomed, and the garden became their haven. They worked together, side by side, creating something beautiful and lasting. Her son grew fond of him, and slowly, Miles felt himself becoming part of their family, a role he cherished. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, watching the sunset, Miles reached for her hand, feeling a peace he'd never known. This was his life now, a life of meaning, love, and connection. And he knew that, no matter what the future held, he was finally where he was meant to be.